I'm really happy to be here speaking with you all. And well, I was feeling a little bit nervous because students don't usually give Dharma talks in the Zen school where I come from, the Zen school that I practice in, even less in English. That is, I am a Spanish speaker. So I apologize because therefore I will be reading parts of my talk. I was speaking with Jeff yesterday, telling him that I was feeling a little bit nervous. And he said, just talk about why you practice and what is it like to practice in Mexico. So I was thinking about this question, why do I practice? And I really entered into a panic because I couldn't come up with any ideas. It was really don't know, especially since I was trying to come up with a very Zen answer. I really went blank completely. So practicing in Mexico, in Montaña Despierta, which is the Zen-inspired space we have opened up here for the practice. It's really like practicing with acute conflict and fear, but I really don't want to depress you with all that. Actually, what I wanted to share with you this evening is this thing that Jeff just talked about, that a book of mine has just been published. It's called The Empty Bowl. Contributions of a psychoanalyst to the study of Buddha Dharma. And the inspiration for this book really came from that retreat in 2008, when we invited Jeff to lead a workshop on Zen practice and psychotherapy. And the Dharma talks were just so wonderful that I thought for myself that one day I was also going to give me the opportunity to put forth my ideas on the subject. So thank you, because really all this inspiration for the book goes all the way back to that retreat that we had here in Jalapa all those years ago. So why do I practice? In a few words, I think I practice to be able to sit with myself and the world. And I aspire to become that empty bowl that I speak about in my book. Why do I practice? To answer this question, I must tell you first about my tripod, that structure that supports me in life, both emotionally and intellectually, and that is made up of psychoanalysis, Buddhism, and Judaism. In my case, indeed, one saves me from the other, and in multiple ways. The idea of salvation plays in all directions, and it is not linear. Therefore, there are just some points that I consider here. I would like to clarify with you that my path has not been common. Literally, I have not been a normal person. I've been interested in too many things over the years, which isn't always a good thing, because maybe I've gotten too distracted and not delved into one thing enough, like I see other people doing. Or who knows, perhaps this is not so true. Perhaps I have indeed conscientiously deepened and a lot. The truth is, I don't know. What I do know is that, as the French psychoanalyst Éric Laurent says, we are all more or less lost. We do what we can. We do the best we can. As I was telling you, I am interested in many things in my life. I am interested in losing myself among all these things, losing myself amongst the people. That is why I think I make a good psychotherapist. I like to let myself be carried away by each person's story. I appreciate the way that everyone sees the world. It surprises me. It impacts me. In general, like many of my clients, I generally am against the dominant group. But if the alternative becomes dominant, then I defend the common sense and everyday position. I can't be just one thing, only a psychoanalyst or only a Buddhist or only a Jew. I like being on the borders, on the margins, being part of the minorities. Sometimes I find myself in very strange situations, like fasting alone in the mountains of the California desert, or chanting mantras in Hebrew and Sanskrit with rabbis at a retreat where Buddhist and Jewish teachings are taught, or doing hour after hour sitting meditation in a Zen monastery, and then doing working meditation in the kitchen, lovingly cutting carrots, or practicing for a month and a half in solitude and silence in a meditation center located in the tea plantations of Sri Lanka with a salamander-faced teacher. Suddenly I look around and I ask myself, do you see another Mexican psychoanalyst here, like you? Any other colleague with whom I have trained? The answer is invariably no. I like this phenomenon of being on the margins. I like to understand the world from different perspectives. I am with my cousin, who is a mathematician and physicist and has a totally atheistic and irreverent attitude. And I deeply admire him and would like to be like him. And if I'm with my dear nephew, who has found his way back to the Judaism of our ancestors, to a living and enlivening God, I deeply admire him and would like to be like him. Sometimes everything attracts me, everything amazes me, and this is not so good. But it gives me the benefit that one thing saves me from the other, and this protects me from fanaticism. In the empty bowl runs a subtext that stands against monolithic discourses, dualist and binary positions, polarized opinions. A subtext that rebels against any discourse that places evil as an external threat placed in the other and does not recognize that most of our problems come from our perspective, constituting internal threats. So to land this question in a more concrete way, psychoanalysis protects me from Buddhism, where the idea abounds that the purpose of the practice is to be happy at all costs, to become like that human being that once existed, the so-called Buddha, a perfect, sublime being who has conquered all suffering. Psychoanalysis protects me from veneration, from the fantasy that we could be complete and have no problems, eradicate the unconscious and transcend all our contradictions. Judaism also saves me in this sense. For example, Moses, the great teacher, the most important prophet within Judaism, of whom it is said that he spoke to God face to face. He had flaws, and so did all the heroes and heroines of the Bible. Moses did not cross the Jordan River. It is not known where he was buried. There is no mausoleum. He is not mentioned in the Haggadah, which is the core story that tells the passage from slavery to freedom of the Hebrew people in Egypt. His name does not appear at all when he was the leader and instigator of this journey, of the passage towards awakening. This I admire a lot. I think something like this does not happen in other traditions. Another example, Buddhism and Judaism save me from psychoanalysis, because in this area also reigns an ideal, paradoxically, because it is not what Freud taught. The ideal that we could break free from all tradition, that we are modern self-generated beings and emancipated from all desire that others might have over us. The idea is to get rid of all feeling of debt, as if all aspirations were the product of an ideal or an alienating desire, forgetting that good wishes and debts of the gratitude also exist and that they enrich us deeply. For a certain vision of psychoanalysis, the past is only a closet full of ghosts and voracious mandates. And it's partly true. Don't get me wrong. It's the daily bread in our offices. But it seems to me that freedom is not only freedom from, but also freedom towards. And that psychoanalysis rarely posits the pleasure that working for the others imply, the joy that comes with sustaining an ethical position in life or fighting for a more just and compassionate world through helping and serving others. Psychoanalysis masterfully rescues the ethics of personal desire, the ethics of singularity, but it falls short in describing our responsibility towards our neighbor, the genuine pleasure that the ethics of interdependence, altruism, and solidarity can awaken. And Buddhism saves me from Judaism, from the pedantic insularity that sometimes characterizes it. The temple that urgently needs to be rebuilt nowadays is not the one destroyed in Jerusalem 2,000 years ago. The temple that we have to rebuild now is the earth itself, which is in serious danger, and we can only do it together through a shared work that crosses all denominations and includes all identities, that even can understand identity not as a fixed, absolute, and immovable entity, but as a contribution that crosses and goes beyond borders and unites us. Buddhism gives me a serene practice to know myself and to understand life, a way of living, a practice that is open and accessible to everyone equally. So returning to my tripod, and this is something I would like to underline, although one part of it saves me from the other, ultimately neither saves me from neither, or rather everything saves me from everything, and nothing saves me from nothing. After all, and so Buddhism tells us, there is nothing to save. The self does not exist as we normally imagine or conceive it. I confess to you that, contrary to what may be glimpsed in my book, In the Empty Bowl, I am more and more convinced that the human being has no solution. Or maybe yes, I don't know. Perhaps the problem is with me. And I think so. Ultimately, I have no remedy. But even so, my tripod has been absolutely essential in order not to go crazy, or rather, to recognize my own madness and to give meaning and depth to my life. Here I come across again to a subtext that unfolds throughout The Empty Bowl and that deeply questions fanaticism and fundamentalism. The title of the book refers to what in Buddhism is known as emptiness or shunyata, the absence of concepts, their intrinsic relativity. For Siddhartha Gautama, the historical Buddha, the three marks or seals of existence condition the nature of reality: lack, impermanence, and insubstantiality. We are not as solid as we thought. This is usually considered a great source of anguish, our primary and fundamental anguish, the existential predicament that hangs over human beings. But for Buddhism, these three marks constitute the very source of our freedom. We are, or life is, flow, process, or as psychoanalysts say, we are originally free association. But we put a solid self in there and we can no longer see. What is meant by Buddha nature, the phrase that we commonly hear in the sense that we are already Buddha, is that deep down we are only irrepresentable process. The bowl is empty in the sense that it is void it is a void that allows life to circulate. More than things that could fill us, these incredible wisdom traditions hide a great treasure, a treasure that cannot be really defined, cannot be caught, cannot be possessed. It belongs to no one, and at the same time, it belongs to all of us. As the teachers affirm, not knowing is most intimate. Speaking of myself, what I have found in these traditions is without a doubt the possibility of experiencing what British psychoanalyst D.W. Winnicott described as the experience of feeling real and feeling alive. That which we all go in search of in a psychotherapeutic process, and believe it or not, in the religious and spiritual traditions that humanity has given us. Being saved perhaps means recognizing that there is no salvation possible, or else realizing that we are already saved, in a strange way, to be sure, since redemption or awakening happens outside or beyond our expectations, in the midst of the very imperfection that conforms our life. So this is a little bit of what I have written to introduce the book. And it's my pleasure to let you know about it and to let you know that my life has revolved around these three legs of this tripod that I describe in the book. Sometimes I feel enlivened by this amazing opportunity to have tasted from these amazing traditions. Sometimes I feel more confused and I wish I had only had one tradition or one practice or one field of interest in my life. It might have been easier, but it has not been my case. So why do I practice? I think I practice to live with my own contradictions in a better way and to become constantly amazed by what this possibility of being alive brings into my life and to the life of the people that I love. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much, Sergio. You're a tough act to follow. I think you pretty much said everything. I think we need a copy of what you read so we could dig into the depth of the contradictions and the reality that you expressed. I just jotted a few things down as you were speaking. And I'm going to start at the bottom where you said the problem is with me. And that almost says it all. We're always putting the problem out there. Some reason, somebody does something, society is this. And of course, as you point out, nothing is simple. It's all, you remind me as you were speaking, this Zen phrase, the one is the many is the one. As soon as you privilege the many, you forget about the one. As soon as you privilege the one, you forget about the many. And what you were talking about fanaticism and fundamentalism, it's like attachment to view, attachment to my idea of truth. And once I believe that I'm right and you're wrong, and suddenly we're going to be fighting. And all the wars all around the world are basically ideological or territorial. I want what you have, or I want to defend myself from you taking what I have. And that's essential Buddhism. And I'm sure it's essential Judaism. And I know from a psychotherapeutic point of view, we're dealing with these fundamental contradictions and confusions. And this desire to find perfection and believe in perfection also leads us to more suffering, because we all know ourselves well enough to know that we're not it. And every year I give a talk around Buddha's Enlightenment Day, And many of you have heard that talk over the years, and I'm always punching holes at the Buddha. When I tell the story of the Buddha, the stories that I like the most are the stories where the Buddha was wrong. Like I often will talk about how his aunt who raised him wanted him to allow women into the Sangha. And he said, no, 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 that's going to ruin our Sangha if we do that. And his aunt probably had the position that nobody else in the world had. She fought with him. She argued and argued and argued and argued, and he gave in. And if it weren't for that battle, women would still be left out. And of course, in many ways, women are still left out because male domination allows that kind of thinking to flourish. We need the push and pull. I've been involved on a committee dealing with some difficulties in a group. And when I gathered the committee together, the first thing I said was, if we all agree right away, we have a big problem. Because if we all just think we're all in alignment, then we're never going to get to the problems. We need that voice that says, wait a minute, maybe we didn't consider this. And often when we're working in a group, we don't really want that voice because we just want to get it over with. We think, well, okay, if we all agree, let's go ahead and do it. But my experience says if we work that way, we end up making things worse rather than better. It's uncomfortable to deal with differences. And in many ways, this transcendent idea of spirituality, what we're really looking to do is wash away the differences and just be comfortable in we're all one. Now, remember, I said the one is the many is the one. So as soon as you get too much leaning towards the one, we've got to be woken up to remember that the many is where the truth is. But if we get too stuck on the differences, we forget what unifies us and what brings us all together. So it's actually impossible. And you know, as Zen students, we know this. We chant the four great vows, and we know when we're chanting them, it's impossible. Save all sentient beings. Everything dies. Everything suffers. That's the truth. All we can do is help. Better to lend a hand and do our best and listen to what another has to say and help from that quality of listening than barge in thinking we know the right thing and that we're going to help you by giving you what we think you need. But that's very difficult. So I'm not sure exactly what Sergio said that made me think of this, but I jotted down the phrase, kill the Buddha. If we think the Buddha is perfect, it's the image of what we're supposed to be, then we're really in trouble. Because we're going to lose the complexity, the fear and the joys that Sergio talked about at the beginning. What it reminded me, and I use the phrase often stolen from Nabokov, the full catastrophe of our life. Sergio came down to aliveness, to be here, to be part of what the experience of this moment is about. Not perfecting the moment so there's no friction, but feeling that aliveness and the presence right in the midst of the friction. Now, I'm just like you. I don't often like that friction. And if we just go for what we like, that's another way of killing ourselves. Because, as Sergio was pointing out, we're very complex. We don't understand ourselves. We start off our Zen practice in the first poem that we read to everyone of the human root. We don't know who we are. We don't know where we come from. We don't know where we're going. We don't know. So rather than practicing with this sense, I need to know and follow what I know, our practice is really about becoming comfortable in not knowing and using those senses that Marshall points us to every time he gives meditation instruction, opening our eyes. Our vision field is open. Our ears are open, listening. The Bodhisattva of compassion in the Zen world, in Korean, we call her Kwanse Mboso. Kwanse translates as hearing the cries of the world. It doesn't translate as shutting off the cries of the world. The cries of the world are part of our human experience. We harm ourselves and others when we think we're not supposed to cry. This empty bowl, Empty Gate Zen Center is our name. This emptiness is this wide open thing that can hold everything. If that empty bowl is big enough to hold the universe, then we don't have to get rid of anything. Just this moment, in its full complexity, we can listen clearly, see clearly, taste clearly, touch clearly. Even that evil thinking, we can think clearly. I'm being sarcastic just to make sure you will know that our thinking is this amazing gift that we have. But we get lost and confused, so we practice to clarify our minds. In the Buddha's Eightfold Path, the first of the Eight Folds is right view. Right view really means no view. If we don't attach to a view, then we can deal with what is. If we attach to it, then we want to keep things out that contradict it. So really, we're practicing to open, not to perfect, but to fully embody our lives. Be here now. That's what Ram Dass said right at the beginning. It's not be here perfectly. It's just be here. Use our practice to open our hearts, open our minds, being able to see clearly enough, hear clearly enough to find some peace in the complexity and the tumult of the moment, and to open our heart enough to help others around us. And if we can do that, then we'll be living out the talk that Sergio gave us tonight. So again, thank you, Sergio, for your words. I appreciated the complexity that you had to express. You probably needed to write it down. So it was a gift to us that you took the time to do that. I'm sure you've been sharing that with others as you've been talking about your book. I know you've done some readings in Mexico. I've seen you've done some in Barcelona. And everybody has their own gift to give. And apparently this was yours, and you've been able to put it down into words and give it to us. So thank you so much, Sergio.